It is September 24th, and I was last talking about inviting Nora Crevens, who was my supervisor at the time, to a Christmas concert at the Mount Angel Abbey. And by the time Nora Crevens was my supervisor at the tutoring center, at the ENNL Center, that is the same place where the rapist Josh Gatov worked. Nora Crevens was Jewish, and I knew that. I didn't have a problem with it. Didn't have a problem with really any religion, especially at that time. And I didn't think anyone had really a problem with me. But she was Russian Jewish, had Russian Jewish background, like Josh Gatov did. And she was married to a Protestant man at the time named Barry. And, you know, I started working there, and then we became friends in a sense. She really liked Josh. I think Josh was one of her pet students' favorites. He was always making her laugh, and they spent a lot of time together. And I thought she was nice. I didn't have a problem with her at all. I showed her some of my writing samples one time, and she said it was just like Isabella Allende. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, it's like mystical realism. And I wasn't familiar with that genre, and she told me to check out the book House of Spirits, I believe. And instead, she ended up at one point giving me a book by Isabel Allende. That was a sort of an autobiography of her life, and not maybe her most common work, but I read it. And I didn't, I never actually have ever talked about her, really, because I just didn't know that it was important to bring it up, but maybe it is. So, you know, when I started having problems with the Mount Angel Abbey monks, I was telling her, she knew, I mean, I sometimes told her about things I was doing, and she knew that I went there sometimes for research, and by the time I was working for her, I think that there were some problems already, and yet I was still, I think I was really questioning what was going on with Brother Ansgar at that time, and I'd written a couple of emails to Father Joachim about it. But since it was Christmas as well, I do believe that by that time I had possibly already talked to, no, I don't think that I had talked to the abbot yet. I think that there was some concern. I have a weird feeling that I met and saw Richard Whittemore at that Christmas concert for the first time. And I'm not sure why. I just remember seeing a man there who looked very interested in me and was observing me intently. And later when I saw Richard Whittemore, Dick Whittemore, he looked like the same man that I had seen at that Christmas concert. I remember what I was wearing. I remember what Nora was wearing. And I was wearing a black wool, it was a wool black, 3/4 length fitted dress. It was solid black, and it had two straps like this, and they were slightly separated, and they went over the shoulder like that, and then there were two that went over the shoulder like that, and then they came from those the two straps that were like this that went over the shoulder. It then went into a squarish neckline, or sort of slightly scooped neckline that was pretty high up, and then the entire bodice was fitted, had a zipper in the back, and the skirt was fitted. It was one piece all the way down to my calf, and then it had a little black cape that went with it, which I wore over that part until it got hot, and then I took off the cape. Because it was hot in there. We were up in the balcony. But the cape was also black wool, and it had a 3/4 length sleeve, and it had a little white fur trim at the, it was a fake fur, and it was about this wide around, and it then it tied in a little bow. There were little 2 strings that you could tie, actually not at the top, down at the breast line, at the bust, because the cape ended right underneath the bust line. And that dress had been my grandmother's. It was Granny's in the 50s. And I had also worn it to a Christmas party at CTR Business Systems in 1997. And it was one of my favorite dresses. It was very plain, but it was very sophisticated, tailored, and very just classic. I think classic is probably the best word for it. It was very 50s-ish, or 40s. So at some point, I remember I took off the cape, which had the tie in the front, down by under the bust, and was sort of sheared there under the bust line. And I remember I took off the cape because it got really hot, and then I was looking over the balcony to have a better view of the people in the Christmas concert, who were monks mainly singing. And I remember that at the point I took off the cape, I do remember that this man who looked like Dick Whittemore was looking at me, and a few other people were as well. And they were in the balcony as well, but sitting on the opposite side. I had never met any of the attorneys. I didn't know that there were any attorneys involved at all at that time. All I know is that when I later met Dick Whittemore, I recognized him. And I recognized some of the other individuals there. So Nora Crevens was wearing, I think, a blue dress. I don't remember the exact color, but I think it was blue. And it was sort of a blousey dress, and it was very blousey on the top, like kind of with blousey sleeves, and then it had a very, very tightly drawn waist with a very thin belt, and she had it cinched up really as tight as she could. And then it had a full skirt that was sort of a blousey kind of skirt that came to just below her knees, I believe. And Brother Ansgar met us both, and of course he was wearing his monk garb, just, you know, the traditional thing that monks wear. And what I remember, what stood out in my mind was sort of intuitive at the time, and what I remember is that they looked at each other like they already knew each other, or that they'd already talked, or there was some sort of unspoken thing between them. And I had this really strange feeling about it. I suddenly had this feeling that Nora Crevens was not on my side. And that was in Christmas. That was Christmas but following a few months after I had been raped. And I didn't tell her about the rape, but she began sort of avoiding me. She didn't talk to me as much, she sort of avoided me. She looked concerned. And then I did invite her to this Christmas party anyway, because they said invite a friend, or invite somebody. So I think what the order was is that I was raped in that summer, or somewhere between July and September. Then I met the monks sometime around my birthday in October. And then I was going to a Christmas concert. But that Christmas concert possibly could have been 1 year later, because I knew those monks almost a year before there was a big problem. I just remember that I did invite her. I could think of the exact chronology and timeline. But I invited her, and by the time I did, I do know that the lawyers were somehow involved, and that they were there at that concert. And I think the strangest thing about all of it, I could tell Brother Ansgar was attracted to her, physically attracted to her because of the way he looked at her. And I could just read that. And I'd been around him enough, like a few times, several times, to know, and he was staring at her chest and waist. I mean, that's fine. Any man, it doesn't matter if you're a monk or not, you know, can look. But I remember that he was physically attracted to her, and she knew it, and she was sort of flaunting it a little bit. And then the strangest thing that I noticed was just this, I felt they had some kind of, they were not telling me what they both knew about me or were holding against me. And that's how I felt. I felt that she was not working in my favor, and that she had that both of them had a secret they were not sharing with me, and it had to do with me, and it wasn't in my best interests. So I sensed this sort of alliance, I guess, between them. And I think that it was a year after I had been raped, so I believe that that alliance potentially was, or maybe it was right after. I will definitely check the date because it's important, but I think that alliance was that the Abbey was starting to feel that they had a problem with me, not wanting to make me look bad or something, and I think that potentially she had a problem with me because she knew, I think, that I had been raped. I don't know how she knew, but I just had a feeling she did. And she was closer to Josh than she was to me. I mean, I was a woman, and she asked me to sing with her a couple times, and I met her husband, who she divorced. And I even house sat for them and watched their cats once. But she was definitely closer in every way to Josh Gatov. I mean, they were pals. So, so I think that was the first time I ever recognized any kind of connection with a joint motive against me, was when Nora Crevens and the monk met each other, and how they acted around me and acted towards each other, and then what happened after that point. And she began avoiding me pretty much from the time that I was raped. She looked guilty. She didn't really talk to me. I think I still tried to make an effort with her and maybe did a thing or two with her anyway. And I never told her what had happened because it was her employee. It was him. And she was friends with him. But then I did quit working there because I was having panic attacks when he showed up. And so suddenly she was acting sort of secretive around me, and then she avoided me and she acted mad. She acted like she hated me, like she had this grudge, and she really didn't like me at some point too. I could see that in her eyes when I ran into her. And it was very strange because she had this grudge against me and didn't want anything to do with me really, aside from going to that one concert, until I had been completely defamed by the Willamette Week. And after I was thoroughly defamed and they refused to print retractions, then that was 2004, and I had worked for her in 1998, and possibly a little bit in 1999. And all of a sudden, after several years of not talking to me at all, or just, she called me up and said that she wanted to catch up. She said she